get this right. As we've seen, as Rebecca was saying, throughout the programme more than once now, the climate emergency is a fight for the whole world. But for some here in Scotland, the effects are already close to home. In the Outer Hebrides, islanders on the low-lying Uists fear that even a small rise in ocean levels will leave them underwater and their livelihoods destroyed. Lorna Gordon reports.
On the edge of the Atlantic, islands which in parts seem as much water as they are land. Experts say the Uists are on the front line of climate change. And some of those who call this home are already adapting to their shifting landscape.
We seem to be getting a lot more rain, very unpredictable, whereas back in my father's day you could guarantee that you'd have plenty of dry weather in August, September, but now it's very unpredictable.
And that's not the only challenge facing these islands, which are so exposed to wet and stormy weather.
A lot of the land actually lies below the level of the sea for much of the tidal cycle. Secondly, you have rising sea levels. Thirdly, you have rising rainfall in winter, and you have the difficulty in a very low-lying environment of getting rid of that water.
The airport here provides a lifeline service to islanders. £1 million has been spent on the latest work to protect the runway, which ends just metres from the shore.
Over the years we're losing up to 5 metres at a time. Designers came up with a system called Gabion baskets, which meant you got mattresses and filled them with rock and then embedded them into the dunes.
If this hadn't been done, what was the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario, it would have eaten into the end of the runway.
This low-lying watery landscape is vulnerable to changes in our climate, with predictions that the sea level here could rise by as much as ½ a metre over the next few decades. At the island's Art Centre, a visual reminder of what the long-term effects could be.
So the line represents a nominal level that the sea will rise to. I hope that it does make people think about what we're doing.
Whoa, what is this?
And from the children here, out taking care of their local beach, messages in English and Gaelic of their hopes and fears are being sent to the climate summit in Glasgow.
What do you think about climate change?
Well, bad, because I'm a crofter myself and we're losing our lands and it's quite emotional. Jan Rutten is some blachud na Crinja. Stop sea levels rising, we could be underwater soon.
These small islands hoping for big commitments from world leaders to mitigate the worst that climate change might bring. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, in the Uists in the Outer Hebrides.
Let's move a bit further north now, shall we, to Orkney. And some islanders there are taking the climate crisis into their own hands. Rather than wait for guidance from government, many Orcadians are adopting a sustainable approach to everyday living. David Delday has this report.
From the past to the present, an electric car journey around Orkney might give us a glimpse into Scotland's future. There are around 11,000 cars here in total. For 500 of those, it's now a case of plugging in rather than filling up. And that number is growing the whole time.
There's no engine to start. And look at that. It's like driving a Dodgem.
As a pilot, Colin McAllister is used to getting his hands on vehicles of all shapes and sizes. He bought his first EV 7 years ago, and now with 2 cars and 2 chargers, he's never looked back.
Once you get used to seeing you've got 15 miles left, 15 miles is forever. You don't worry about it. So range I think, is always the big thing. But beyond that, there's virtually no maintenance cost. There's no road tax to be paid. There's no fuel to go in.
On windy days, Colin uses his own turbine to power his house and cars. A smart charger looks at supply and demand on the grid to work out the best and cheapest times to top up the battery. 1 in 10 properties here have some form of microgeneration. If the wind's not blowing, there's a fair chance the sun might be shining. Jonathan Porterfield's hot water comes courtesy of solar panels. They're part of an integrated system. When there's enough sunlight, his heating and electric car will also be powered, and energy will be stored in batteries for when it's needed. The priority for where the energy goes is controlled on this mobile phone app.
The height of the summer, June and July, my electricity bill for this house for a month was £2.13. That heated the house, my hot water, cooking, cleaning and driving 850 miles in my electric car.
But would something like this work in other parts of Scotland?
We think the lessons that we're learning are going to apply. We know these cars are expensive at the moment, but we know they're going to get cheaper. We know that the charge points are not necessarily as reliable as they need to be, but that's getting better.
While that transition to EVs might not happen overnight, Orkney is certainly in the fast lane towards a climate-friendly future on the roads. David Eldey, BBC News.
Well, let's pick up on some of those points, shall we? Because Orkney might be driving its way to a sustainable future, but can the growth of electric vehicles in that group of islands be copied elsewhere? We heard some of the contributors to that report saying it could, but let's ask Dr. Ewan McTurk. He's an electrochemist and a member of the Electric Vehicle Association. He's in Edinburgh for us now, as you can see. Good evening, Dr. McTurk. First of all, I mean, it's tempting to see the future as us all trading in our petrol and diesel cars and picking up an electric vehicle and getting on with it from there. But we're a long way, as mentioned in that report, from having the charging infrastructure for a start to be able to cope with that, aren't we? How far away are we from that?
Well, we're making incredible progress there. At the moment, we've got about 27,000 public charge points across the whole of the UK. There are some reports that have suggested we would need about 25,000 in Scotland. Bearing in mind that not only are these charge points being added at a rate of about 1,000 a month at the moment, but that rate is exponentially increasing, as is the uptake of electric vehicles.
So where are we with that rate at the moment? How many do we have? If we need 25,000, how many do we have just now?
We have around about 3,000 at the moment, but as I say, we're not only seeing ChargePlace Scotland, which is the government-backed charging network, increasing the number of charging hubs and on-street charge points, etc., across local authorities across Scotland. We're seeing the private sector coming in. They'd initially been hesitant because ChargePlace Scotland charge points had been free to use. We're starting to see councils introducing fair use charging tariffs, etc., and the private sector, particularly in the Central Belt, is starting to carpet major towns and cities with rapid chargers that are really easy to use. What we need to do is make sure that we get that same coverage in the Highlands and Islands as well. But thankfully, particularly as we've seen in Orkney, there are some very proactive individuals, communities and councils as well who are listening to those in the know and putting that infrastructure in. So genuinely, it's not going to be a concern, and it's already really easy to drive an electric car in Scotland.
And technology, listen, regular viewers of this programme will know I can bore on about this subject for hours. I've had an electric car for 3 years and I'm a total evangelist. But the future and technology is going to change things, isn't it? Because it might not be that we're going to have to unwind a cable and plug it into the front of our car. How might we be charging these things in future, and what might the range be? Because that's another anxiety for a lot of people. If you run out of juice, your wheels just stop turning.
So what we've seen is over the past 10 years, we've gone from electric cars having a typical range of about 80 miles per charge to the average new car, electric car on sale today, having a range of over 200 miles per charge. And that's more than most people can do without having to stop for a comfort break at a motorway service station or the like. So already electric cars can travel further than most people. That's enough for about a fortnight's worth of typical commuting as well. The battery tech is still improving at quite an impressive pace. In terms of how we're going to charge them, to be honest, for most people it will be unwinding a cable, which isn't as tedious as it sounds. It's really easy. You'll plug it in overnight. If you have a driveway or a garage, as the vast majority of drivers do, you're laughing, you're fine. For people who don't have off-street parking, people who need to charge on-street, there's the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles on-street residential charge point scheme. Transport Scotland tops up that funding. Your local authority applies for it. You get fully funded charge points outside your door, and it's up to your council to apply for that. So
hang on, what if you live in a tenement and there's 30 people living in your stair or whatever, and it services, say, 5 cars in those households in the stair? Where's the charge point going to be?
So there's the opportunities for either communal car parks. We've seen that, for example, with Dundee City Council. They have large charging hubs at the top of several of their multi-storey car parks. They have discounted rates for tenants to be able to use those overnight, and then they clear their car out of the way in time for the commuters to come in and charge up on them during the day. So that works really well. Some local authorities don't have those off-street car parks, communal car parks, but you can put very discreet on-street charge points in. There are some designs available, including some clever Scottish innovations, where you wouldn't know that the charge point was actually there until it was in use. And it is an incredibly slender, compact thing that has actually been designed with disability groups in mind. So even if you're partially sighted, it's actually surprisingly visible. So there's a whole bunch of innovations in that regard. These can quite neatly go along a lot of streets, and they'll provide a charge for your car overnight. But bear in mind, you don't need to plug in every night. As I said, typically, the average person with a new electric car only needs to plug in once a fortnight. Another option is there are now multiple platforms that allow people who have a driveway and a home charge point to share that with residents who don't have that, and they'll be reimbursed for electricity costs there.
One vision of the future, that there's also shared cars, driverless cars, that technology going to come in. There's electric bikes and scooters that can zip us across cities and towns. We're gonna notice change before we know it, aren't we? All right, Dr. Hugh McTurk, thank you very much indeed for sharing your expertise with us here on The Nine this evening.
Thank you.